Welcome to Formula One and Son. I'm Tom.
And I'm Oscar.
Well, Oscar, we come after a interesting Italian weekend where we saw a spectacular Formula 3 crash, a ludicrously ridiculous Formula 1 qualifying session, and a nail-biting and exciting race. What did you think about it all? Where to start?
It's just wow. It was the exciting weekend right from the beginning. The Ferraris obviously looked fast in the practices.
Their straight line pace was mega. Yeah. Charles
Leclerc, looking at the results now, topped every practice session except for practice 3, where Sebastian Vettel topped it. So what we saw right off the bat from the practice sessions, the first one was raining. So we saw some weird results, like Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris got second and third. I don't know how that happened. I was at school.
It was a bit wet.
Yeah. And then in the second qualifying, second practice, I think it was the dry session.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to see more actual results.
It was
compared
kind of
to, like,
mixed.
qualifying.
Even in P2, it was mixed. It was kind of dry early, and then kind of got a bit wet
But
late.
we saw some realistic results, like Charles Leclerc, Hamilton, Vettel, Bottas, Verstappen, and Albon, all were the top drivers.
And the story that I think we got out of practice was, the Ferrari straight line pace looked really strong. Mercedes kind of up there with them, particularly in Sector 2.
They only really stuck with them, Sector 2, the sectors with all the corners.
That's right, So Sector 2, they were fast. Red Bull's kind of there or thereabouts occasionally, but we knew coming into the race that some people were going to carry penalties, weren't they? And I think that was Verstappen being probably the major one of note. I think Lando also had one. Gasly had a penalty.
Yeah.
There's a few penalty. Checo had a penalty because of his. So the people that had engine explosions in the previous race in Spa, and I understand. I think the Hondas were coming with their new Spec 4 engine. I want to say
so.
Yeah. So we went into quali kind of with this expectation that the Ferraris were going to be fast, right? And that kind of proved to be the case. We saw that Max Verstappen had some kind of issues, was going to have a grid penalty anyway, but had some issues, didn't he? Which we've seen him have over recent weekends, where he's got that kind of throttle mapping or some kind of issue going on. He didn't end up setting the time. Obviously, the Williams got knocked out in Q1, as you'd expect. But one of the early kind of scalps was Sergio and Romain Grosjean. But the Hasses again kind of showing really variable pace at various times of the weekend. We also saw this weekend a kind of, and we don't talk about him a lot because Mr. Consistency, Kimi Räikkönen, he's been a quiet performer of the year, always kind of getting to the points regularly, qualifying fairly regularly in the top 10. But we saw him...
in Q3, I think.
Yeah, but we saw him crash a few times this weekend. I think he crashed in P1, maybe he crashed in P3, had a spin in Q3 maybe.
And then crashed in qualifying?
Yeah, and in fact, I think he crashed in Q2. And that's why he didn't set a time in Q3. There were lots of people that didn't set times in Q3. We'll talk about that.
He still made it into Q3, though. So.
Yeah, based on the time he had already set. An impressive showing from Lance Stroll through the weekend. Seemed to have good pace. Made it through to the Q3, probably the first time in a long time.
A weird thing happened. The end part we'll get to talk about, but he didn't set a time in the first stint where everyone else was setting times.
That's right.
And that did come back to haunt him later on.
Yeah, a little bit. And it probably made sense given that he was probably going to end up 10th. Even though he had made it into Q3. But let's talk about that qualifying session, shall we? So things are progressing as normal, but the theme of the weekend through all of qualifying and to some extent through the race, the tow, and this is where you draft in behind another car, it punches a hole through the air, and they say that can be worth up to
2/10, I think they said.
And then some. And what's more important is if you're the person not getting a tow, then you lose that 2/10 and the person behind you kind of gains it. They don't slow you down, of course, but you're just not getting the benefit. So the kind of difference between having a tow and being the guy in front is like almost half a second. So it's significant.
Not to be confused with dirty air, which is basically being behind a driver, which reduces your downforce because the air is disturbed.
And what's interesting this year is, and Monza's unique, to be fair. So Monza, other tracks, you're exactly right, Oscar. The dirty air is significant enough that even though you might get a tow on some straights, you lose so much time in the dirty air behind the car. This is because you're not getting that clean air to create downforce, which you want in corners but slows you down the straight. It's not worth it. In Monza, however, and this year, because the cars have bigger rear wings, they're punching a bigger hole through the air. And Monza has how many long straights do you say? 3?
7.
Yeah, 7. It's got a number of longish straights, right?
Around 3 or 4.
Yeah, and you could be as far, I think they were saying almost 4 seconds behind the car in front. Probably want to be about 3, and you still get the tow, but you're not getting a lot of that dirty air in the corners. So it's well worth it. So what this created was this farcical situation in quali.
Is that no one wanted to go out first because everyone wanted the tow.
That's right. So everyone waits until the last minute to say, you go out. No, you go out. And, of course, no one goes out. So eventually, of course, someone has to blink and go out.
I think that was Nico Hülkenberg.
I think it was Hülkenberg, yeah. But then, of course, you go out first. You're first on track. And then you go slow because you want someone to overtake you.
And everyone else goes slow because they don't want to overtake you.
That's right. So in Q3, what normally happens in the third session of qualifying, this is the top 10 shootout. Normally there's enough time that you do your first run, get a banker lap, try to do a good time. In this case, everyone from first down to 7th did that.
And just in case you don't know what we're talking about, basically you get out from the pit lane, do a lap to like warm you up. Like think of it as a warm-up lap. It's called the out lap.
Yep.
And then you cross the line and then start your actual fast lap and then have to do a cool down lap again once you cross the line for the end of that.
That's
and then
right.
go back in the pit lane.
So all of that takes time.
So one lap is 3 laps technically.
Yeah, that's right. An out lap, and it's a minute 40 in Monza.
Around that.
A fast lap, right?
No, a fast lap is like a minute 20.
Oh, sorry, minute 20. But a minute 40 is about an out lap.
Around that.
So about 20 seconds slower. Yep. That's if you're doing a normal out lap. So you've got a minute 20 as a fast lap, so a minute 40 out, and then your cool down lap on the way in. And so that whole process, it takes 4 minutes or something, right?
Around that,
now obviously at the end of qualifying, when the time stops, you have to be on your fast lap.
Yes.
And so you can complete the lap if you're on it. So what we saw at the end of quali is everyone's out there trying to get position, blocking the road.
Yeah.
Charles Leclerc has provisional pole position. That means that he's already set the fastest time. Then Hamilton, then Bottas, then Vettel. Then the Renaults, Ricciardo and Hülkenberg, and then Sainz, Albon, Stroll and Raikkonen not having done a time. And I think, was Raikkonen, had he crashed by now?
Yes,
was he out?
He was out.
Yeah, because he started from the pits, right? And we'll talk about that because that's fun. And so everyone's out there jostling for a position, and then suddenly you're like, well, hold on a second here. These guys aren't going to make it to the start line in time to do a lap. And sure enough, the only guy who finally kind of saw sense was Carlos Sainz.
And Leclerc, but I don't think he realised it.
That's right. In fact, Leclerc did by a 100th of a second or 1,000th, like just on the line.
Where'd you hear that?
But just from about the place in the reading up afterwards. And then, but his team told him he'd missed it. And so he backed out of it. That's why.
Well, it doesn't matter. He would have gone pole.
He was on provisional pole anyway, so he would have backed out once he realised everyone else missed out. Sainz completes his lap, qualifies 7th, which was basically last of the people that set a time. He did improve by a little bit. So we ended up with no one getting to set their second lap time. Conspiracy theory fueled by Lewis Hamilton came out that, the Ferraris were just trying to block everyone because they were already on pole. That's nonsense. It wasn't actually the Ferraris blocking everyone. The people that actually got reprimanded after the race for blocking...
Nico Hülkenberg.
I
think Perez? No, Stroll.
Stroll. No, Sainz maybe?
Maybe.
Albon even, I think. But there was a bunch of them, not the Ferraris, I guess is the important point. And so 3 people did get reprimands. Oscar, there's a question for you. How do you solve this problem?
Of what? like blocking?
Yeah, of these crazy...
Oh.
We saw it in Spa as well, right? Where these people do these crazy... In the Formula 2 race or Formula 3 race, they red flagged it because there's a lot more cars on the track. So it was so crowded and so down...
30 cars, I think.
So it was so crowded and dangerous. When they tried... This same situation came out, they red flagged it and basically said, none of you are played well, so you can't play. So crazy stuff. I've heard suggestions of kind of one-shot qualifying where you just go out and you do your lap.
That would be
Just for Monza, maybe. It's an interesting idea.
I would just maybe allocated times for each team to come out. I wouldn't.
That's kind of like
I
one
just
shot
kind of
qualifying.
wouldn't do anything about it. It's fun for the audience.
One thing I think they should do is minimum lap times so that you can't go any slower than a certain time.
Or
kind of like
minimum
VSC.
out lap times.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Out lap time. Yeah, not minimum.
Yes.
Well, there is actually a minimum qualifying time too. It's 107% of pole, right? But if you don't get within 107% of pole, you can't race. But and this was instigated a few years back when some of the back markers were even slower than Williams are now compared to the front markers.
3 seconds off the pace.
Yeah, they were slower than Formula 2, I think, at one point.
Cool.
So minimum out lap time, maybe that makes some sense. Anyway, so qualifying was an absolute shambles. But look, if you're, these are top level racing drivers, so to some extent embarrassing. I thought it was kind of funny, and it was.
Yeah,
I thought it was quite entertaining. Yeah, it was enjoyable. So then we get into the race, and the race had a couple of really interesting stories. The main one being.
Before we start that,
go ahead.
Well, you're probably about to talk about it, but yeah, quite a few people did take penalties. So.
Yeah. Tell me about penalties.
The starting grid. I don't know, because my Wi-Fi isn't working right now. But the starting grid was something. Yes. But it was not what qualifying was.
Well, that's right, because Verstappen started from the back.
Gasly started from the back.
Gasly was out the back. Raikkonen started from the pit lane. A few people were moved out of position. But we had Leclerc on pole. We had Bottas, Hamilton, Ricciardo, Hülkenberg. And then Albon had a... No, Albon didn't. Did Albon have it? No, he got a penalty in the race or dropped back. Albon must have started back a little bit.
Yeah.
We saw that Sainz also had. Did he have a penalty? We're getting a bit rusty here.
Sainz, I think he did not have a penalty.
But we'll have a look. But tell us anyway. We'll try to sort that out as we look through the race. But the race starts, and what do we see at the beginning of the race? What happens? You don't remember?
I do remember. So basically, everyone, it seems, gets a pretty normal start. Well, that's what I thought anyway at the beginning once they showed the replay of the start.
Yes.
I just saw that everyone got a pretty ordinary start except for Stroll, obviously.
Yeah.
Who always gets good starts.
Yeah, Stroll got a great start as usual. In fact, I saw a stat come up on the screen at one point saying he's made 55 positions on the first lap this season. Now, you could attribute that to the fact that he's horrible at qualifying, except for this weekend. That's an exception, of course. He did a really good job this weekend.
Yes.
But yeah, he has a great start. And Vettel actually got a good start but got boxed in. Leclerc gets a pretty clean start. And then Hamilton gets past... Hamilton doesn't get past anyone. Hülkenberg gets past Vettel. And Ricciardo.
And
Yeah, so Hülkenberg has this cracker of a first lap, gets past them. Leclerc gets off down the road. Actually, I think, did Hamilton get past Leclerc briefly and then he got back past him? Can't recall. Don't think so.
I don't think. Because
maybe I'm thinking Spa.
Fourth.
And off they go down the road, and Charles is doing pretty well.
He kind of just zooms off.
Yeah, Vettel gets back past Hülkenberg pretty quickly, and some laps later, Ricciardo gets past Hülkenberg as well.
Yeah.
And so the race kind of unfolds. Verstappen clacks into the back of someone on the first corner. He's starting from the back, and he takes his front wing off. I think he ran into the back of a Racing Point.
Yep.
Almost said Force India. And he just misjudged it as they all kind of bundle up at the back end of...
and also, I think Sainz and Albon had this battle, but it did not work out.
Sainz and Albon had a really interesting battle.
And pushed... I think Sainz pushed Albon off the track to the gravel.
Yeah, so Albon is having an interesting race. Gets past makes a move on Sainz, doesn't quite get it done, does the kind of under and over, and then goes to overtake him. Was it around one of the Lesmos?
I think so.
And he's on the outside, and he just didn't have it in there, and then Sainz kind of gives them the friendly little nudge, and Albon goes off into the gravel and gets a penalty, right? Gets a drive-through, I think. Albon got a penalty, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And so Albon got a penalty for that, probably fair crack. This is a race where penalties were pretty interesting and important. Verstappen, meanwhile, is taken off his front wing, had to pit, comes out, it's looking pretty racy, but has to make up some spots. We hear that Kimi Räikkönen has to serve a penalty for starting the race on the wrong tyres. This isn't something you see very often. Effectively,
how did that happen?
Well, effectively, Alpha made a bit of a mistake. He qualified in the top 10.
Yes.
And when you qualify in the top 10...
Yeah, you take your fastest Q2 time, or what tyres you were on for that, and then...
That's right, you start the race on that. But because he had the crash and taken penalties for gearbox and engine or whatever, because he crashed in Q3, right?
Well, yeah, but, I mean, his tyres were dead if he crashed, right?
No, but he didn't crash on the tyres he qualified in Q2 on. So those tyres were fine because they got taken off after Q2. So he was supposed to start the race on those tyres. Alpha thought, because he's starting the pit lane, we can start him on whatever tyres. And of course, they wanted to start on the mediums, probably some new mediums. Of course, that's against the rules. And they said, no, you should have started on the tyres. You qualified. You did your fast lap in Q2. So he gets a penalty, pretty harsh one too, stop go or a drive-through.
Just a drive-through.
Meanwhile, and this is where the race...
Sorry, but it was a 10-second stop-go penalty, which is basically you are forced to go in the pit lane, stay in your pit box for 10 seconds while they do nothing to your car, drive out, and then go back through pit lane and resume your race.
It's basically the harshest penalty you can get before getting disqualified. And we saw this given to two drivers. Now, let's talk about where the race got really fruity. Leclerc's going off. Hamilton's keeping him pretty honest, right? Yeah. And he's having a pretty good race. They around lap 8 though, Sebastian Vettel, who's kind of in fourth, hanging on to Bottas in the mix, coming through the second chicane. Is that the Ascari chicane?
Yes,
I think it is. Coming through the Ascari chicane, takes a bit of curb on the inside and to the left before you turn right, and
spins.
Not only does he spin with no one behind him, because by this time it's lap 8, they'd lost the Renaults. The Renaults didn't have the pace to hang on to Vettel.
Unfortunately.
So he's not under no pressure from behind, spins all by himself, and then just has what we can only describe as a brain fade. So he's come off the track a little bit, eventually gets it in the gear, and doesn't indicate shoulder check and give way as you would on the road.
Didn't they say that you can't turn your head?
Well, you can turn your head, and you can be sensible and not just barge back onto the track. He just comes straight onto the track. So the Renaults have gone through by this stage, but Lance Stroll, who's running in P7, I'm going to guess, given Vettel was 4th, so 5th and 6th of the Renaults, they've gone by. Lance Stroll, innocent victim, comes past, tries to dodge Vettel coming back on the track, runs over his front wing with his rear tyre. He then spins. Vettel's now got front wing damage. Lance Stroll comes off. Vettel races off down the road. I think has to come back in to fix his wing. He does.
Yeah.
And then Lance decides that he's now going to come back on this track. And here comes Gasly. Not quite as bad. And Gasly doesn't run into him. But Gasly goes
onto the gravel.
That's right. Yeah. So what transpires after that? A bunch of penalties.
Yeah. So Vettel gets a 10-second stop-go penalty again. Well, yeah.
Yeah, lucky not to be disqualified, and he got that because he caused a collision.
He didn't get that for unsafe return to the track? Or whatever
returning to the track unsafely and causing a collision. Unlike Lance Stroll, who
just got a drive-through.
And that's, they say, because he didn't cause a collision. Now,
it's probably just because he didn't.
No, it's because the FIA have clarified it's because he didn't cause a collision.
It's not because he didn't spin on his own. It was kind of Vettel's
Well, I think there's probably this, you've just been hard done by, but he still did the same thing. He came onto the track, and given it had just happened to him, it's kind of a bit crazy.
Yeah.
Look, Vettel comes onto the track, kind of perpendicular, and therefore, if he got hit by Stroll, it was going to be a T-bone. After what we saw last weekend in Spa with Antoine Hubert sadly passing away in that horrible accident.
They weren't going 200 miles per hour.
No, but it's pretty quick, that chicane. It's not a slow chicane. He comes on
that's
sideways. True. He's going to get T-boned. He was lucky.
F1 2018, I can't do that without spinning, so I feel Vettel's pain.
Well, it's funny you mentioned video games. To me, it was exactly what when I watch you deliberately try to crash on F1 2018.
It's not that deliberate.
It looked exactly like that, except we're talking a 4-time world champion, not almost 12-year-old guy playing F1 2018. But anyway, it was really bad form. What do you think, Oscar? Let's reflect on Sebastian Vettel's season, and in fact, everything since the last time he won a race, which was Spa last year. What are you thinking? Are you thinking he's just lost it, hasn't he?
Yeah, except for Germany, in which he came second.
This year?
Yeah. He came second in Germany.
Yeah, and he won Canada, according to himself. But
he came second.
Yeah, but he's made so many mistakes and he's spun so many times, particularly this spinning malarkey, kind of in Bahrain when he was chasing Hamilton. Now, he had dirty air there, but he kind of spun out of nowhere. Yeah. He spun in Monza last year when he was battling with Hamilton in the same section.
He spun in Japan, I think Canada last year.
Anyway, I the guy's achieved a lot in Formula One, but
he's getting old anyway.
Meanwhile, let's talk about his teammates. So that's Vettel. His race is pretty much disaster from there on in.
Like 2 times.
Yeah, he had to pit a bunch of times. It's a bit of a nightmare.
He does end up coming 13th. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, he's got a fast car, so he comes back through the field a little bit. Eventually got Russell near the end. They actually had a little battle in the end, the Williams and the Ferrari, which you wouldn't imagine. So let's talk about the front of the pack. Hamilton basically is riding Leclerc's gearbox whole race, right?
Before we do that, shouldn't we talk about Sainz and Kvyat DNFing?
Yes, please. What happened there?
So Sainz, I think he just broke down, right? Or
yeah, his engine went up in smoke, or he had something like that. Whose car was it? No, it was Kvyat was up in smoke that we saw in the background.
Yeah, well,
Sainz had an oil leak.
Also went off in the Curve Grande, I think.
Yeah, he had an oil leak, didn't he?
Yes,
I think what they said.
And then Kvyat also just failed.
They retired Kvyat, didn't they? They pulled him in.
No, Kvyat went off in the grass.
Oh, sorry, I'm thinking Magnussen. Magnussen they retired. Yeah, there was some issue and they retired him. The issue being he was slow. Maybe not.
Grosjean was whinging as usual.
Yeah,
he got beaten by a Williams.
Yeah, Grosjean had a really scrappy race. He ran into a few issues. And Raikkonen had, a real scrappy race as well. Yeah. And we've talked about Vettel. We've talked about Stroll kind of recovering after being in 7th. A real shame. Gasly, a bit of a nothing race. It was okay, I think. Lando, it was okay. Giovinazzi did well, and it was good to see him not crash on the last lap when he was in the points.
Gasly was kind of affected by the fact he ran into the gravel when Stroll almost crashed.
But let's talk about the weekend. We've got the rockstar new Ferrari driver, Charles Leclerc, on the back of winning in Spa, pole and win in Spa, pole in Monza, the home race for Ferrari. They haven't had a Ferrari win since for 10 years. Yeah, for like a decade or something. He's the new guy. Vettel still never won in Monza for Ferrari, and he's gone and spun all by himself. Tell me about Leclerc's race. What did you think about it?
It was pretty solid, but it wasn't like he was in front the whole time. So
well, yeah, but he was under pressure almost all race from Lewis Hamilton, probably the best guy in the field, in probably the best car in the field. Yeah. Admittedly, the Ferrari probably had a slightly better package this weekend. I think the story with the Mercedes was, so Hamilton had a crack. They came in and pitted. Bottas stayed out longer. So Leclerc and Hamilton pitted around the same time. The difference was Hamilton went to mediums, Leclerc went to hards, right?
Yes.
Bottas stayed out longer, about 7 laps longer, if I recall correctly.
I think so.
So once all that washes out, you got Leclerc in the lead again. Hamilton is in second position. Maybe a lap or two fresher tyres. Leclerc pitted pretty early, but went to the hards.
Yeah.
Hamilton comes out on slightly fresher tyres than Leclerc, mediums, of course, so a faster compound, softer. And Bottas is a little bit behind, but on much fresher tyres. And the Renaults are just doing their thing. It looked a bit interesting. We should say there were some VSCs that played into this for a few drivers.
Yeah, there were 2 VSCs.
Yeah, and I think a few people got lucky and unlucky. There was the first one was for Sainz, and then there was another one for, what was it, for Kvyat?
Yeah.
Presumably.
It was.
And we should say Ricciardo and Hulkenberg running 4th and 5th. Looked like Ricciardo was going to get unlucky with the first VSC, but pitted under the second one.
Tried to pit under the first VSC, even though it was gone.
But it just ended just as he came in.
And an average pit in Monza is 30 seconds. It's quite a long pit.
So as a result...
And then on the second VSC, Ricciardo pitted. Apparently, you only have a 15-second time lost in pits for VSC. So
versus what? Without?
Now, Ricciardo was more than 15 seconds ahead of Hulkenberg.
So what's the difference? What's the pit time without a VSC?
30 seconds.
So just to explain that, on the virtual safety cars, the drivers have to reduce speed.
By 40%.
Yeah, by 40. And so this means, of course, if you pit, your speed limited to, Monza's probably 80 kilometres an hour, I'm guessing.
Probably.
Some pits are 60 where they're really tight. It might be 80 kilometres an hour. So that means you're going slower than the rest of the pack, and therefore you lose a lot of time. But if the rest of the pack is also going slower because of a safety car or a virtual safety car, it effectively means you get a cheaper pit stop. You lose less time.
Yeah.
So usually you'll see, that's why people dash into the pits under a safety car or a VSC. So Ricciardo got the benefit of that, ended up kind of 18 seconds in front of Hulkenberg. And the Renaults basically had a pretty lonely race after that. Albon, though, was quickly working his way through the field and actually doing some cool overtakes, being aggressive, didn't have the straight line speed, so had to make overtakes in corners. I'm really enjoying Albon's racing. He's getting his elbows out. He looks like he's fitting in. You could cheekily say that he's beating Max Verstappen in 2 races out of 2 so far, so he has. Out points scored Max Verstappen, but he's just a few little scrappy things early on. That incident with Sainz, probably a little too ambitious. But overall, I'm liking that he's just getting his elbows out and racing. Yeah. I'm enjoying it, and he's fun to watch on track. Let's go back to Leclerc, though. You say, it was pretty good. He was under immense pressure. Now, he made a few mistakes. We saw him nip up a break coming into...
Well, so did the people who were giving him pressure, though.
Yeah, Hamilton did as well. And ultimately... But we saw... Let's go back, though, to the battle between Hamilton and Leclerc. It was tough. And, in fact, there was one move that he got a black and white flag for, which is, they're calling it a yellow card. That's a football or a soccer reference where you get a warning. So this was coming down into the second chicane, was it? Around there?
Yeah, second chicane.
And then Hamilton got a good run on him. He's on the outside. Leclerc moves over under braking. You're supposed to leave a car's width. He didn't, because Hamilton had to go off track, and then Hamilton kind of ran through the corner and lost a bit of time. That was an incident that a lot of people probably feel in previous times, or other drivers or other races, people got penalties for 5-second penalties, and there's lots of examples on that. I won't re-adjudicate that, but yeah, it was tough.
They were talking about how the younger drivers aren't getting...
Well, Hamilton said that in the post-race interview. Yeah. And in the post-race interview, Hamilton's like, well, the younger drivers get away with a lot. There's also this, some drivers just favourably looked upon. You could argue that if it was Magnussen or Verstappen or Kvyat, remember that era, that penalty Kvyat got in China when he bumped into Sainz and Norris, maybe?
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't his fault. A minor thing, and he got a penalty. And at the time, I think we probably commented on this. I think I felt at the time it was because Kvyat was Kvyat, the torpedo, right? This year he's been great. I think he's managed to work out of that reputation. But at the time, he'd just come back, and Magnussen, seen as a rough driver, Verstappen. Everyone loves Charles Leclerc. He's got a great story. And so there's an argument to be said that there's a bit of favoritism that goes on in the FIA. Maybe it's conscious, maybe it's unconscious, who knows. Nonetheless, Vettel gets, who am I talking about, Oscar? Leclerc gets a black and white flag, which is basically a warning, and off they go to the races. Eventually, Hamilton's medium tyres are obviously starting to give up the ghost, and in one attempt, into the first stop. He nips a break. Bottas, by this time, on his much fresher tyres, is caught up to the back of these two.
Yeah, but he locks a break into the first chicane.
Has to go through those kind of styrofoam bollards.
And by that time, he's like 6 seconds
I want to
behind.
point something out here. When Leclerc earlier nipped a break and did a similar thing, he, instead of going through those styrofoam bollards where they're really tight turns and you have to slow down, he chose to kind of keep going over the bumps and kind of cutting the corner. And to me, that seemed like it lost him a lot less time.
He still did lose
But
time.
he kept the position to Hamilton when that
But
happened.
I think that's just because he lost the brake. He nipped the brake a lot later. I don't think
and he
had
was
a choice.
already in the turn. I just had this feeling that if Hamilton had decided to do the same thing, and you're right, maybe it happened later in the corner for Hamilton and he was deeper into it, that he could have done the same thing and maybe not lost that position to Bottas. Nonetheless, he by this time I think he knew his tyres were going off. I've heard him since say, Oscar, that he thought he knew that Bottas was catching. He was probably going to let Bottas through to have a shot. Would Hamilton have let Bottas through to have a shot?
Nope.
That's what he says. This is like Vettel played the team game in Spa and helping Leclerc out. Sure you were. But anyway, Bottas gets through because Hamilton's made this mistake. And he's on these fresh tyres, and we think, here we go, Bottas is going to mount an attack. It never looked like he was going to mount the same kind of serious attack that Hamilton did.
He finished within 0.8 of Leclerc, though.
But he kind of, and I think he made a mistake at one point, it just never seemed to really be as close. And look, the Ferraris had this great straight line speed. And so, you had this effect where even with DRS open, the Mercedes, the Hamiltons, I was going to say, the Mercedes weren't catching the Ferraris. So, yeah, look, so in the end, Charles Leclerc, I've got to say, great drive. He was tough. He had his elbows out, maybe a little too far once or twice, but very aggressive, drove a tough race, withstood pressure from both Hamilton and Bottas. And frankly, had to because his teammate messed up and wasn't there to help out. Bottas could pit late because he had no pressure from Vettel. So Bottas could run whatever race he wanted because he didn't have to worry about an undercut from Vettel. And that gave Mercedes really two shots at beating Ferrari. But it didn't play out, and we had this really a spectacular victory from Charles Leclerc in Monza, a spectacular podium. Tifosi go nuts. Yeah. Everyone's super happy. Hamilton gets booed on the podium as he always does in Italy. It's just part of the course. Ricciardo, I've got yes, we're very Ricciardo biased here. Of course we are. But I've been saying now for a little while, and I pointed this out in Spa, the Renaults had a lot of pace, but they had to take the penalties in Spa. And then, of course, Ricciardo had that first lap incident with Stroll in Spa where he had all that damage, so didn't get to demonstrate it.
And also a bad strategy in Spa.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then he tried to run that one stopper, right? Now, this weekend we saw truly what Renault had on these fast circuits. Genuinely, I mean, Ricciardo said, we were genuinely a fourth fastest car. Probably not. Vettel probably should have been up there without his mistake, but they were genuinely fast. Had the Red Bulls had a clean race and been up and qualified up the front, that would have been an interesting battle.
Yeah.
Would have liked to have seen that. Albon was catching Hülkenberg at the end, but couldn't get past him.
Yeah.
And the Renaults were hard to overtake. We saw that in Spa. I think Grosjean got stuck behind Ricciardo for a long time in Spa. So yeah, great. Look, next race, Oscar. Singapore.
You're going to it.
Yes, I'm going to Singapore. I can't wait for that.
I think I'll just give you radio science.
But my point is, I don't think we're going to see a fast Renault in Singapore.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to that race. That's your fault.
So that was it. Albon recovered to 6. Perez had we didn't see a lot of him, but he had a great race. He started from the back and came in 7th. Really good race. Verstappen recovered to 8th after that, having to pit after losing his front wing, starting from the back. Giovinazzi, pretty solid race. He's fighting for his seat, you've got to say. He's an Italian driver in an Italian team in Monza, got points. That was pretty exciting.
I think they might keep him for another year.
Question is where Hülkenberg goes, I guess, if he's going to Haas or Alpha. And frankly, Raikkonen, who's been Mr. Consistent, had as he put it, a SHIT weekend. And it's actually in the Alpha Press release. He had a horrible weekend from where to go. Gasly, a bit unremarkable, but strong enough. Stroll, unlucky. Vettel, time for Vettel to retire?
Yeah.
Too early?
Maybe. Ricardo going to Ferrari confirmed?
Vettel, what? Vettel to Red Bull, maybe? No, I don't think so. Russell, good weekend. Had that fight with the Ferraris at the end. They basically knew Monza was going to be horrible for them. It was actually probably a little better than they thought. We mentioned Raikkonen, Grosjean, horrible. Kubica, nothing, as per usual, and DNS for Magnussen, Kvyat, and Sainz. As a result of all of this, Oscar, we see Renault get a huge haul of points. The last couple of races, Sainz has not got any points to DNFs,
Which
right?
is really good. But Sainz is still ahead of Ricardo.
Shows you how good the start of Sainz's season has been, that he's still miles ahead, right? Like 30 points.
But after Sainz...
Have you got the Drivers' Championship there?
Yep.
How many points is Sainz?
Sainz is at 58, Ricardo's at 34.
Yeah, so he's still, 20-odd points ahead.
And then, obviously, Gasly's the highest midfield runner from all his days. But I'm not going to count him.
Yeah, well, midfield runner.
But then Ricardo is the second highest... And then Albon's tied with Ricardo.
But what's that? Yeah, but Ricardo's 34 points. You go down to Raikkonen in 12th. So from 8th to 12th, 34 to 33 points, separating from 8th to 12th. So that only emphasises how tight that midfield battle is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, the only people who aren't right up there are Grosjean, Giovinazzi, Kubica, and Russell.
Yeah. And we saw Leclerc overtake Vettel in the drivers, if I'm not mistaken.
You are not mistaken.
Yeah. Is he now the number one driver at Ferrari?
No. It's
Why
not
not?
on his contract.
It's not in his contract, yeah. You're probably right. That's probably in Vettel's contract. But there must be some performance clauses, right?
Maybe. I don't know. We don't know. We haven't seen Vettel's contract.
So, Oscar, I've got to say, probably another cracking race, right? Really entertaining. Lots going on. Good racing. And what's more important this time, there's been a lot of good racing this year. A lot of it happens in the midfield, though. What we saw this time was a great race for the win, right at the front. An epic battle between, you've got to say, probably the best of his generation in Lewis Hamilton and a candidate for the best of his generation in Charles Leclerc.
So, Dad, do you think we have time for a little happy sad?
Real quick.
Okay. You start.
Well, who are we doing? You tell me who we're doing and I'll tell you.
Bottom to top.
Oh, in race results?
Standings.
Oh, in standings? I don't
Just
have
sort
them
of
in
reflect.
front of me, so you tell me.
Okay. So, Russell, he's sad. Very sad.
Well, Kubica's got a point, doesn't
Because
he?
Kubica's got a point. So
No,
Kubica's
Russell's not
beating.
sad. Russell is sad because of the car he's driving and happy with his performances.
Probably.
Everyone's impressed by George Russell this year.
Last race was pretty good. He came 14th, I think.
Yeah, he's had a couple of good races.
Kubica's sad because he's a terrible driver. Giovinazzi...
He's terribly slow now.
He's a terrible
unfortunately.
driver in a terrible car. Giovinazzi is... I don't know.
He would have been very despondent after crashing last lap in Spa and feels probably somewhat redeemed this race, and particularly with Raikkonen tripping over himself this race, it probably takes a little bit of the heat off him. So he'd be in between.
Grosjean is whining.
Grosjean's sad and he's letting you know it every race.
Magnussen is
Magnussen is sad because he has a horrible car and he's had some shockers.
Stroll is happy because he did somewhat well in last race. He doesn't have too many points.
Yeah, but Stroll will be frustrated because Perez, even when Stroll's looking like he's going to do something better than Perez manages to outshine him.
Yeah. Norris is
but his
sad
dad owns
because
the team,
he's
so
sort
does
of
he
not
care?
gotten any points for the last few races.
Yeah, but Lando's doing a really solid job.
1 point this race. But...
And Lando's driving pretty well. He's doing a solid job. He'd be a bit frustrated he's not getting better results, but he's doing a pretty solid job. Yeah. Who's above Lando?
Above Lando, we have Perez, who's doing well because he's outshining his teammate.
And he's got a 3-year contract now, right? He's happy. He's feeling like he's in a good position from that point of view.
3-year contract, though. I still can't believe it. Why?
Because he believes in the future. They've got some money behind them now with Lance Stroll's dad investing. So yeah, he's a happy man.
Anyway, Kimi's probably happy. He used to be the top of the midfield like in 7th. Now he's in 12th.
Kimi's done a great job.
That's how close the Mahajin is.
Kimi's done a great job for Alpha. He's performing really well. Barring Monza, he's had a great season. He's probably got less pressure because he's not a Ferrari. He's probably having a blast.
Hulkenberg is sad, as we know, because he left Renault. Well, that wasn't his choice.
Well, he's without a seat, and he's not, and he's been outperformed by Denny Rick this season. Which was
going to happen. But.
Yeah, and kind of in every way. Like Denny Rick just had this, bias. Denny Rick had a cracker of a weekend in every way. He was my driver of the weekend, if not driver of the day.
Yes.
Anyway,
Kvyat is happy.
He's doing great.
He's doing well, but
remains
he's been
solid.
Outperformed by his teammate just because his teammate was in Red Bull and he wasn't.
Yeah,
which he doesn't like that.
No, I think Kvyat's doing a great job. Albon, I'm loving his form so far at Red Bull.
I think he's having a good time.
Mate, the guys had a good couple of first races at Red Bull. Everything he could have asked for.
Yeah.
Denny Rick.
He's happy.
Getting happier?
Happier, yeah.
But will probably be unhappy in Singapore.
Starting to perform better. Yeah, he expects that. Sure.
But I think Ricciardo hinted at, and so I'm quietly a little bit interested to see how they go for the rest of the season. Ricciardo, obviously they were saying, hey, the engine's now great. The guys in Viri, which is where they build the engine, have done a great job and finally can hold their head high after 5 years of shame.
Yeah.
But Ricciardo's kind of hinting at maybe they've turned a little bit of a corner, but we shall see. Carlos Sainz, be very happy. Feeling unlucky. Probably had a very lucky... Well, I complained a lot at the beginning of the season that he was getting the run of luck with every little call, and Denny Rick was getting the opposite. The last two races... Well, this race in particular, that's switched around, but he's having a great season.
Well, I mean, Spa, Ricciardo did not get any good
Sainz
calls.
is having a great season. McLaren's having a good season. If they can continue their forward trajectory, that'd be great. Gasly... How do you feel?
Sad.
He's been okay since he's gone back to Toro Rosso, though, hasn't he?
Red Bull do carry out that plan that you had. Like, they're trying out every driver to see who would be the best to drive for Red Bull.
Albon's got a compelling case.
Then, I mean...
Kvyat's got a compelling case.
Gasly wouldn't be too upset with the fact that he got demoted because he was expecting it, probably, if they told him that plan.
Oh, no, he would have been really upset.
Pardon?
He would have been upset to get demoted. Yeah. Really upset. So he won't be a happy guy right now. Sebastian Vettel, probably the saddest guy on the grid, I would say, at this very moment. He must be, I don't know what would be going through his head. Do I retire? Do I still love the sport? Do I go to another team? Will he stay at Ferrari? Leclerc's really starting to establish himself.
Vettel to Red Bull confirmed.
Leclerc, happiest man on the grid?
Yeah.
Two poles and 2 wins on the trot. Max
still 100 points behind Hamilton.
Max Verstappen, scrappy couple of races, right?
Yeah,
first turn incidents at the last 2 races. So yeah, he's had a scrappy few races, but has had a fantastic season outside of that. No one's worried about Max Verstappen. He's doing a great job.
Bottas, the wingman.
What do you think Bottas is? He's lost that edge, hasn't he? Kind of feels like he's gone back to that. Yeah, you're going to be number 2. You don't have Hamilton's pace, but you're okay.
I think
he's got a contract for next year.
He is a better driver. Not better than Hamilton, obviously, but I think he's better than what...
he was last year?
Definitely. But I think he's better than what Ferrari. Mercedes are making him seem like.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, they're sort of making him the wingman as they did last year.
That's just because Lewis Hamilton's so good.
Yeah.
And then finally we get to Lewis Hamilton.
Just outshining him so much that he looks really bad. But
Lewis Hamilton, you got to assume he's going to win the championship. He's got a huge lead, but never say never. Things can swing. A couple of DNFs here and there, and Bottas gets a couple of wins, and suddenly it looks different.
7 races left in the season. There's Singapore, then a week after that Russia, a couple of weeks after that Japan, a couple of weeks after that Mexico, a week after that United States.
How many races was that?
2 weeks after that Brazil, and
then Bahrain. Oh, that was like 7 races, right?
Yeah.
7 times 25 is a lot. So we're going to see a lot of points up for grabs. Imagine Hamilton has 2 DNFs and Bottas gets 2 wins. He gets 50 points and he's right up there with Hamilton. It can happen.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah, probably not, but it can. So you never say never. Well, that's your lot from us. We've run a little bit long today, so thanks for your patience.
Reach us on Reddit at Formula One Sun, Twitter Formula One and Sun,
Gmail,
formula1son@gmail.com. All pretty standard stuff.
And we appreciate if you can review, if it's on Apple or whatever, then we appreciate it. It's interesting to hear your feedback. So I'll be at the Singapore Grand Prix for the next one. Oscar, unfortunately, isn't travelling with me. So I will try to, I'll probably take the recording equipment. I'll be there with my brother, Peter, so I might be Formula One and brother. And we might record a few impressions, and then Oscar, we can record your impressions when I get back. So the next episode should be a little bit interesting.
You're going to have to do some podcast magic. Make me and your brother and sing.
We'll do some magic. Yeah, we'll do some podcast editing magic. Well, that's your lot from Formula One and
Son.